Good evening. The operation we're breaking down today is being described by military analysts as one of the most shocking episodes since the start of the war. In just a few hours, a massive Russian convoy and dozens of armoured vehicles, ammunition trucks and transport vehicles simply ceased to exist, and it wasn't taken out by a conventional strike. It happened because Ukraine used something that's rarely viewed as a weapon: extreme weather. The incident took place in the early hours of the morning in eastern Ukraine, right in the middle of a snowstorm that cut visibility down to just a few yards. According to Ukrainian intelligence sources, this convoy had been using the exact same route for days at the exact same time, convinced that stretch was safe. What they didn't know was that every one of those movements was being tracked. Every change in temperature, every shift in the wind, every detail of that terrain was feeding into a larger plan to turn that narrow mountain pass into a kill zone. What happened inside that frozen corridor was fast, precise, and carefully engineered to squeeze every possible advantage out of the weather. Nothing was improvised, nothing was accidental. The storm became cover, the ice turned into a barrier, and the wind formed a natural curtain. Ukraine didn't just ambush a convoy. It activated an environmental trap that had been set weeks in advance. If that sounds unlikely, don't worry. Tonight we're going to walk you through it step by step, how a combination of drones, hidden sensors and extreme weather conditions led to the near instant destruction of an entire military column, and why this operation is being treated as a warning sign for the future of modern warfare. To understand how this attack became possible, we need to go back a few weeks. During that period, Ukraine was facing significant delays in receiving Western military aid, and that opened a window of confidence for Moscow. Convinced that Kyiv would have reduced offensive capability, Russian commanders began taking unnecessary risks. One of those risks was turning a narrow mountain pass into a nightly transit corridor. Same route, same hour, same conditions, every single night. Satellite images and Ukrainian drone footage show that over 10 of the previous 11 days, this exact convoy travelled the same path, moving high-value equipment, including weekly shipments of anti-tank mines, supplies critical for reinforcing Russian defensive positions. According to defence analysts, the cargo carried on that final night alone was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But while Russia saw routine, Ukraine saw pattern. And in war, patterns are opportunities. That's when Ukrainian intelligence units launched a quiet operation, mapping every weather detail in that region. With drones modified to withstand extreme cold, they spent weeks studying how wind moved inside the valley, how snow accumulated on the slopes, how freezing temperatures distorted thermal signatures, and even how engine noise echoed through the terrain. All that data fed into environmental analysis models that allowed something unusual, predicting how the storm itself could be weaponized. Meanwhile, special operations teams infiltrated the area at night to install pressure-sensitive devices beneath layers of compacted snow. These small, thermally inert sensors were impossible to spot visually, yet capable of detecting the weight of every vehicle passing over them. They emitted no signals, they didn't rely on GPS, they simply waited, and in the cold they became even more reliable. With Russian behaviour predictable, extreme weather conditions approaching record levels and the entire route mapped down to the centimetre, Ukraine realised it had something rare. An opportunity to turn the environment into a weapon as effective as any missile. The goal wasn't just to attack. It was to block, confuse, isolate, and only then eliminate the convoy completely. And at 3:12 a.m, when the first Russian tank crossed the exact point marked by those sensors, the operation stopped being a plan and became a precision-executed mission. From the moment that first hidden sensor detected the weight of the lead vehicle, the Ukrainian operation entered its opening phase, and it didn't begin with explosions or direct strikes. It started with something much smarter, a carefully engineered deception designed to manipulate Russian perception from afar. Seconds after the trigger was activated, 20 small Ukrainian drones came to life. They had been hidden inside natural cavities in the canyon walls, covered with sculpted ice for complete camouflage. These drones weren't armed. Instead, each carried heating modules capable of releasing bursts of warm air into the storm. It sounds simple, but the effect was remarkably precise. The blizzard, already dense and turbulent, pulled the pockets of heat upward, distorting the air and creating thermal columns visible to Russian radar miles away. In other words, Ukraine manufactured a ghost convoy. To Russian radar operators, it looked like a large formation of Ukrainian armoured vehicles advancing north. Too big to ignore, and far too fast to make sense in that weather. Without suspecting a thing, Russia reacted exactly as Ukraine expected. Nearby artillery batteries began repositioning to face the supposed threat. Their attention shifted completely away from the real convoy, still moving slowly, still vulnerable, and now without proper ground support. Meanwhile, down in the frozen corridor, the actual vehicles kept pushing forward with almost zero visibility. Temperatures continued to drop and wind gusts surpassed 50 milliwatts. The storm, which should have been reason enough to halt movement, turned into the perfect curtain to hide every step of the Ukrainian plan. With Russian radar deceived and artillery pointing in the wrong direction, the second phase was ready to begin. Now that Russia believed it was responding to what it saw on radar, Ukraine would strike where they were blind: the convoy's internal communication. With Russian radar distracted by the false thermal signature, Ukraine moved into what military analysts consider the decisive phase for destabilizing the convoy, shutting down all internal communications. Inside that narrow mountain pass, already consumed by the blizzard, Russian vehicles relied almost entirely on radio contact to coordinate speed, spacing, and movement. Any disruption, especially under those extreme weather conditions, could trigger immediate disorganization. And that's exactly what happened. From camouflage positions hidden between snow-covered rock formations, 8 Ukrainian electronic warfare drones were launched. Their mission was simple and devastating: flood the canyon with broadband interference, blocking Russian military frequencies. Within seconds, crews lost all contact with one another. Truck drivers could no longer hear orders from armoured vehicles. Tank crews lost communication with sector commanders. Not even short radio bursts could get through the jamming. Inside the storm, that blackout acted as a chaos multiplier. Visibility was already down to just a few yards. Coordination now depended on hand signals no one could see, or on guesswork. And while Russian crews tried to understand what was happening, Ukraine deployed a psychological tool designed to deepen the confusion. Using the natural acoustics of the canyon, Ukrainian forces activated directional speakers hidden along the rocky slopes. These devices played the sound of engines and armoured vehicles manoeuvring, creating the unmistakable impression that Ukrainian units were closing in from the flanks, from above the ridgelines, and even from the rear. For soldiers trapped inside freezing tanks and trucks with no communication and almost zero visibility, these sounds felt like a real, immediate threat. Crews began slowing down at random, others accelerated, trying to escape what they believed were enemy vehicles approaching. The formation broke apart, and in this moment of uncertainty, Ukraine delivered the final blow of the psychological phase. A small reconnaissance drone descended through the storm and dropped 3 thermal markers on the snow ahead of the convoy. To Russian sensors, these markers looked identical to the heat signatures of idling tank engines. Believing Ukrainian armour was positioned right in front of them, the convoy did exactly what Ukraine needed. It stopped. A simple decision, but a fatal one. And it happened at the worst possible point, the narrowest, most unstable, most dangerous section of the entire route. Now frozen in place, blind, cut off from communication, disoriented by the storm and convinced they were about to be surrounded, the trap was finally fully active. The Russian convoy wasn't just a target anymore, it was a stationary target. With the convoy completely stopped in the tightest stretch of the corridor, the operation entered its boldest phase, turning the terrain itself into a weapon. And this stage didn't involve explosive drones or artillery strikes. It relied on engineering, planning, and weeks of invisible preparation. Beneath nearly 5 feet of accumulated snow, Ukrainian teams had planted 15 demolition charges weeks earlier during covert nighttime infiltrations. These weren't designed to destroy vehicles directly. They were ice fracture charges calibrated to direct their explosive force upward against the canyon walls. The goal wasn't to create explosions. It was to trigger controlled collapses of massive slabs of pre-weakened ice and compacted snow. When the order was given, all charges detonated at once. The effect was immediate. Huge sheets of fractured ice tore loose from the canyon walls, crashing down onto the road with avalanche force. The first impacts were mistaken by Russian crews for artillery strikes, causing instant panic. Some vehicles lurched forward, others tried to reverse. One tank skidded sideways on the ice, wedging itself across the path and blocking the entire column. In less than 30 seconds, the route was completely obstructed, but that was only the beginning. A second line of charges, placed higher up the slope, detonated moments later. This time the goal was to seal the corridor. The accumulated snow collapsed onto the far end of the road, forming a barrier more than 14 feet high. The convoy was now fully encircled, blocked in front, blocked behind, unable to maneuver, without communication and with no visibility. Experts say that at this point, the environment stopped being a backdrop and became an active component of the operation. Wind, snow, ice, and the canyon itself formed a natural chamber where every sound echoed and every movement became difficult. Several crews attempted to exit their vehicles but retreated immediately as new cracks echoed through the frozen cliff walls. Inside this trap, temperatures below 0 grade began affecting engines and hydraulic systems. Fuel thickened, batteries drained in minutes. Every second the convoy remained immobilised meant less capability to react, and that was exactly what Ukraine was waiting for. With the convoy enclosed, vulnerable and isolated, the operation moved into its most lethal phase. With the convoy isolated and the canyon transformed into a frozen chamber, Ukraine initiated what experts call the final decision phase, the precision airstrike. Unlike the earlier stages, this one wasn't designed to confuse or psychologically pressure Russian forces. The goal now was straightforward: neutralise the convoy's combat capability as fast as possible. Just minutes after the passage was fully blocked, 12 Ukrainian strike drones broke through the cloud layer. Each one carried a shaped charge warhead designed specifically to pierce the most vulnerable part of a tank's armour, the roof, which weakened significantly under extreme cold. These drones descended through the blizzard in staggered, unpredictable paths, using the canyon walls as natural cover. From inside the Russian vehicles, detection was nearly impossible. The storm masked the sound of drone motors. Visibility was down to just a few feet. For many Russian soldiers, the first sign they were under attack was the explosion itself. At 3:36 a.m, the first drone struck a tank positioned near the centre of the formation. The shaped charge penetrated the upper armour and ignited the ammunition inside. The blast echoed through the canyon like it had been amplified by the terrain itself. 2 ammunition trucks behind it were hit by shrapnel and detonated in chain reaction. In under a minute, the heart of the convoy was burning. The second wave of drones targeted the front of the column. 3 direct hits that made any attempt to advance impossible. 2 more drones struck the rear, sealing off the escape route. The canyon was now enclosed by ice walls and fire. Thermal footage from Ukrainian drones showed a striking phenomenon. The extreme contrast between the heat of the explosions and the sub-zero blizzard created dense vapour clouds that further reduced visibility. Disoriented Russian gunners fired blindly into the snow, mistaking reflections and shadows for targets. But nothing they did changed the outcome. In less than 4 minutes, the convoy's operational capability had collapsed by more than 70%. Engines stalled, trucks burned, electrical systems froze. Crews were disoriented, trapped, and rapidly losing options. Russia wasn't fighting anymore. It was struggling to survive the environment, the drones, and the overwhelming disadvantage created by the ambush. And it was exactly this moment of total vulnerability that allowed Ukraine to begin the next phase, destroying what remained of the convoy's strategic cargo. Once the convoy was fully incapacitated, no movement, no communication, and its strategic cargo compromised, Ukraine moved into the final stage of the operation. This was the phase designed to ensure that nothing could be salvaged and that no useful trace remained on the battlefield. It was meant to be fast, decisive, and absolutely final. At 3:54 a.m, 2 heavy strike drones emerged above the storm. Unlike the drones used earlier, these carried thermobaric warheads, a type of munition built to maximise pressure waves in enclosed environments. And inside that narrow, icy canyon, the effect would be devastating. The drones positioned themselves at opposite ends of the convoy, one at the front, one at the rear, creating a converging blast pattern. At 3:55 a.m, both detonated simultaneously. The explosion tore through the canyon like a deep, rolling thunderclap. The pressure wave travelled the full length of the corridor, compressing the air with enough force to deform metal structures and collapse internal compartments. Snow suspended in the air vaporised instantly. The blast erased electronics, munitions, equipment, and any vehicle that still had a recognisable shape. When the echo finally faded, the canyon fell into complete silence. It was no longer a battlefield. It was, in the words of military analysts, a mechanical extinction event. With total destruction confirmed, Ukraine initiated extraction. Electronic jammers were powered down. The hidden sensors embedded in the canyon walls received a remote wipe command, erasing all stored data. Reconnaissance drones scanned the area to confirm no Russian forces were approaching. And just before 4 a.m, the teams involved in the operation were already miles away. The storm did the rest, covering tracks, shifting snow, erasing evidence. At sunrise, when Russian reconnaissance drones finally reached the location, they found only an unrecognisable graveyard of twisted, scorched, frozen wreckage. According to independent military assessments, fewer than 5 vehicles retained identifiable outlines. Everything else had been reduced to mangled metal. And the strategic impact was immediate. The destroyed shipment of anti-tank mines delayed Russian defensive operations by at least 2 weeks. An operation months in the making, executed in under 50 minutes, now cited as a defining example of what happens when intelligence, climate and technology merge on the modern battlefield. What happened in those early morning hours wasn't just an ambush. It was a clear warning about the future of modern warfare. Ukraine's operation didn't rely on superior tanks or long-range artillery. It relied on intelligence, environmental analysis, and the ability to turn extreme conditions into tactical advantage. Weather, usually an obstacle, became a weapon. The terrain, often a limitation, became an active element of the strategy, and a convoy that seemed protected was eliminated before fully understanding the threat. Military analysts already described this event as a milestone in the integrated use of climate drones and terrain engineering. Beyond destroying a target, the operation disrupted supply lines, delayed reinforcements, compromised strategic routes, and sent a direct message to Russia. Predictability is vulnerability. In war, routine is a weakness waiting to be exploited. For Ukraine, this was a tactical, logistical and psychological victory. For the rest of the world, it was a glimpse into a rapidly evolving battle space, one where new forms of warfare emerge from elements that have always existed but have rarely been used this way. If you found this analysis important, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps expand the conversation and supports our work. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates on the major geopolitical developments shaping our world. We'll see you in the next report.